20 years ago, a poor woman was abandoned by her husband while carrying his child, left to die in exhaustion and solitude. 20 years later, the daughter he denied returned, not as a weak creature begging for love, but as a wealthy, unyielding queen carrying justice. Between the light of fame and the shadows of sin, an empire would fall, and a memory would awaken. This is not merely a tale of revenge, but a verdict against arrogance, and an immortal hymn to the dignity of a mother. The boardroom on the 43rd floor of Lancaster Industries had never felt so cold, not because the air conditioning was set too low, but because the tension in the air froze every movement and every silent breath. The walnut table stretched like a battleship, gleaming under golden light, a symbol of Edward Lancaster's power for 3 decades. At its head, he sat upright, posture still imperious, though his fingers tapped the polished surface in an anxious rhythm. "What is this nonsense?" Edward growled, eyes fixed on the door where a figure had just appeared. The double doors closed behind the young woman. The echo of her heels on the marble floor rang like the gavel of a judge pronouncing sentence. Every gaze in the room turned to her, and for a moment, silence reigned so absolute that even the ticking clock on the wall seemed deafening. She wore a black Saint Laurent suit, tailored to perfection. Every step, every flick of her wrist, every breath exuded an unshakable confidence. Not a single hair out of place, not a crease upon her stern face. They say youth often comes with recklessness, but here, at 20, Amélie Moreau radiated the icy aura of someone who had survived battles greater than those fought by the grey-haired men seated around the table. Edward narrowed his eyes. "Who are you? Who gave you the right to summon me in this board here?" An elderly lawyer rose, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Lancaster, this summons came from the office of the newest major shareholder. It seems that—" "Absurd!" Edward cut him off, his voice sharp as a blade. "No one holds enough shares to—" The footsteps ceased. Amélie stood in the flood of light, streaming from the floor-to-ceiling windows, with the misty London skyline as her backdrop. Her amber eyes swept the room before locking onto the man at the head of the table. "Gentlemen," she began. Her voice was clear, crystalline and cold as steel chilled in ice. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know you wonder who I am and why I stand here today. Allow me to answer." A wave of murmurs rippled across the room. Edward scowled, his irritation tangled with curiosity. A man long accustomed to absolute command was now forced to listen as another seized the floor of his fortress. Charles Whitmore, Edward's longtime legal confidant, spoke. "Miss Moreau, if I recall the name correctly from the summons, you've acquired 30% of the company through recent transactions. But with only that, you cannot." Amélie smiled faintly and cut him off with a flick of her hand. "I'm afraid you are mistaken, Sir Whitmore. As of 9:47 this morning, all shares held by Arthur Pembroke and Victor de Clermont have been transferred to me. In addition, several other partners agreed to sell." She placed a thick folder on the table and slid it toward Charles. "See for yourself. Notarized documents, signatures, seals, everything is legal. I believe you'll notice the final number, 53%, enough to become the controlling shareholder of Lancaster Industries." The room fell still. Edward snatched the folder, scanning page after page. His face paled. The words, the signatures, the figures, they were mercilessly real. His trembling hands rustled the papers. "This, impossible," he muttered. "Arthur would never. Victor and I had money." Amélie tilted her head, her tone gentle yet cutting. "Always reveals true loyalty, Mr. Lancaster. A lesson you once taught many others. I merely returned it to you." The board froze in place. Lawyers, advisors, and investors exchanged glances filled with shock, fear, and a hint of intrigue. They were witnessing history shift. Edward slammed his hand on the table. "Who are you?" Amélie stepped closer, the light sharpening her features. Edward faltered for a brief moment. Something about her seemed familiar, a resemblance he could not yet name. "I am the one you forgot," she said, her eyes glinting. "But I never forgot you, Edward Lancaster." His breath caught. "Do I know you?" A smile ghosted her lips devoid of warmth. "You'll realize soon enough." She turned toward the window, gazing at the city shrouded in morning fog. 20 years ago, when you were 32, fresh from your first major deal, you married a woman with no title, no wealth, only a heart full of love and dreams. Her name was Elise Moreau. Gasps filled the air. The name cut like a blade into memory. Edward froze, confusion flashing in his eyes. "No," he whispered. Amélie turned back the contours of her face, her cheekbones, eyes, and chin mirror Elise's. Only now, there was no softness, only storm. "You are Elise's daughter?" "Yes." Her voice was iron, each word striking like a hammer. "Amélie Moreau, the daughter of the woman you scorned, humiliated, and abandoned because she did not belong to your so-called high society." A deadly silence engulfed the room. Edward wanted to deny it, but every detail she spoke her mother's name. The timeline was undeniable. The image of Elise in a plain dress at the Ashcroft Gala surfaced, along with the jeers of nobles, and her anguished eyes when he let her go. Amélie pressed on, merciless. "I know more than you think, Edward. Your birthday is March 15. Your blood type is O negative. You're allergic to shellfish. You've been haunted by poverty since your father's bankruptcy when you were 12. Secrets you shared with only one person in a warm bedroom. On cold nights when nightmares woke you. That person was my mother." Edward staggered, as if struck in the chest. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. "You forgot her. You forgot me." Amélie stepped closer, her voice low and blade sharp. "But I did not forget. For 20 years, I prepared for this moment, the moment you lose everything, as you once made my mother lose everything." The scrape of chairs echoed. Several board members nodded, as if conceding this new reality. Power had shifted. The Lancaster fortress crumbled within its own walls. Edward's hands clutched the table's edge, his face burning with rage and humiliation. "What do you want?" Amélie smiled again, cold as frost. "I want you to know what it means to be stripped bare. To taste loneliness, disgrace, despair, to see your name erased from the walls, the towers, the contracts you once paraded. In short, I want you to know what it means to lose everything." She raised her hand. The doors opened. Security personnel in Moreau Enterprises uniforms entered, standing in formation. Their polished badges glared like a death knell to Edward. "Edward Lancaster," Amélie declared, her voice ringing through the chamber. "By authority of the controlling shareholder of Lancaster Industries, hereby renamed Moreau Enterprises, I announce that you are dismissed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." All eyes fell on Edward, once untouchable, now dethroned upon his own throne. He leapt to his feet, roaring, "I built this empire from nothing. My name is etched on every brick. No one has the right." Amélie slid another folder forward. "This building, as of this morning, has been renamed the Elise Moreau Tower. The new sign is being mounted as we speak. When you step outside, you'll see it for yourself." Edward froze. Security advanced, firm but courteous. "You have 15 minutes to gather your personal belongings," Amélie said, her words final, merciless. "After that, you will be escorted out. Nothing here belongs to you anymore." Edward wavered, nearly losing balance. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally. But every face turned away. None wished to sink with a drowning ship. In that moment, Edward Lancaster, the man who once ruled London's financial world, felt absolute solitude for the first time. Amélie turned toward the vast window. Below, the city stretched beneath its shroud of mist. The sky remained grey. But for her, this was only the beginning. "Phase 1, she whispered. "Just for herself. It has begun, Mother." That winter night, snow fell thick upon London's old streets, turning the city into a canvas of silver white. Golden lamplight spilled across Ashcroft Manor Square, where the elite gathered for the most prestigious winter ball of the year. Ashcroft Manor, an aristocratic mansion from the 17th century, with domes and neoclassical columns, shimmered beneath hundreds of chandeliers. The great oak doors opened wide to welcome guests stepping out of carriages, limousines, and Bentleys dusted with snow. The soft music of a symphony orchestra floated through the air, mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses and bursts of laughter. Just past 30, Edward Lancaster was at the height of his golden years. His tailored black tuxedo fit his tall frame perfectly. His slicked back hair gleamed, and his eyes carried the self-assured glint of a man who believed the world was opening at his feet. Yet that evening, his companion was not a countess, nor a wealthy heiress, but another woman altogether, Elise Moreau. Elise wore a simple black evening gown. It bore no prestigious label, was bought from a modest shop, and altered by her hands. But with her skill and taste, the gown framed her figure with quiet elegance, bearing her slender shoulders and graceful curves. Her dark hair was neatly pinned, and her chestnut eyes glowed with a gentleness tinged by shyness. Elise did not belong there. She was the daughter of a French bookbinder who had lived in exile in England. She had studied literature and painting at a provincial school, only to abandon her studies after her father's death. She now worked at a small bookshop in Bloomsbury, where Edward had stumbled in on a rainy afternoon. It was her unadorned charm, her quiet intellect, that captivated him. To Edward, she had been something new, unlike the glittering women of his circle. Their love had been swift. They wed quietly at a civil registry, without fanfare. Elise had no dowry, no lineage, only her heart, and the dream of building a future with Edward. And in those first days, he swore he needed nothing else but her love. But that simple love was about to be tested. The moment they entered Ashcroft's grand hall, stairs closed in upon them. Ladies in glittering gowns, gentlemen in tailcoats, all paused, studying the unknown young woman at Edward Lancaster's side, the rising star of London's financial world. What on earth is she wearing? A woman's voice rang out, deliberately loud. I hear she's Edward's new wife. Another chimed in, laughter on his lips. Heavens, she looks like charity work. Some shopgirl's doll, perhaps? Laughter rippled outward like a wave. Elise trembled slightly, her hand tightening around Edward's. She hoped her husband would hold her tighter and say anything to shield her from the humiliation. But Edward only felt his face flush, his heart pound, and a wave of shame rose. The sharpest words came from Lady Margaret Ashcroft, hostess of the ball. She raised her wineglass and looked Elise up and down. Edward, your philanthropic spirit is admirable. To bring a common girl into high society, truly generous. The room erupted in laughter, striking Elise like open-handed slaps. She kept a small, polite smile, but her eyes betrayed the depth of her hurt. Edward, she whispered. Yet Edward, rather than defend her, rather than hold that trembling hand, slowly withdrew his own. He stepped aside, creating distance. It was the instinctive act of a man terrified of ridicule, of a reputation tarnished. At that moment, Elise understood, and her heart cracked for the first time. That night, they returned home in silence. Outside, snow fell harder, blanketing every street and rooftop. Elise stared out the window in the car, her reflection blurred by snowflakes. She did not weep, the tears only welled in her eyes, unshed. When they reached their small flat, Elise turned to him and asked softly, Edward, are you ashamed of me? The question hung heavy between them. Edward knew he should have embraced her, but told her no, that love mattered. But pride, cowardice, and the suffocating weight of the outside world smothered any tenderness. His words came, cold as steel, You don't belong to my world. You never will. Elise froze. 3 days later, on Christmas Eve, Elise received a thick envelope. Inside lay divorce papers and a cheque for £20,000. On a slip of paper, Edward had scrawled a single line. Buy yourself something decent for once. Her heart shattered. The man who once swore eternal love now cast her aside as though she were a failed experiment. That night, as Christmas fireworks burst beyond her window, Elise sat in the cold room, her hand resting on her stomach where a fragile life had just begun, and whispered, My child, your father has abandoned us. The following month, Elise left the flat with only an old suitcase. She searched for work, waitressing, cleaning, sometimes sleeping on friends' couches. Yet she held on to one fragile hope. She carried a life within her, and believed that child would be her reason to endure. But London's winter was merciless. Snow turned to slippery ice, and winds cut to the bone. Elise collapsed in the streets more than once, weakened by hunger and exhaustion. One day, she fainted on the steps of a subway station, and it was there that Sir Alister Montgomery, the man who would change the fate of mother and child, appeared. But that is a story for another part. The snowy night at Ashcroft Manor remained the beginning of tragedy. It carved an unhealing scar into Elise's heart. It was the moment Edward Lancaster chose hollow prestige over true love, and the spark that lit the fire of vengeance would burn in Amélie Moreau's soul for 20 years. The bitter cold of that London winter came not only from snow and wind, but also from the despair enclosing Elise Moreau. After being cast aside, she carried her child in solitude, working day and night to afford a shabby room in the East End. One evening, with the wind lashing her thin face, Elise was going home after a shift at a cafe. Night had fallen, snow poured endlessly, and her body could no longer endure. Her trembling legs descended the steps of the underground station, and before she could grasp what was happening, the world spun. She collapsed. Everything blurred. The sound of trains faded into the distance, and darkness swallowed her whole. When Elise opened her eyes, she first saw not the cold ceiling of her rented room, but the pale white glow of a hospital ward, the smell of disinfectant, the steady beep of a heart monitor, and beside her bed, a silver-haired man sat, his large, warm hand gently holding hers. "You're awake," he said, his deep English voice calm and steady. "Thank heavens." Elise blinked in confusion. The man wore a simple wool coat, nothing like a patient. His lined face bore the weight of years, but his eyes were bright, resolute. "I am Alister Montgomery," he introduced himself. "I happened to be passing the station when I saw you collapse. I called an ambulance and came with you. For a moment, I feared I'd watched a life slip away." Elise instinctively moved her hand to her belly. Panic surged. Her voice broke. "The baby. What about my child?" A young doctor entered, smiling reassuringly. "The baby is fine, heartbeat steady, but your body is exhausted, dangerously malnourished. You need rest and proper nourishment. Otherwise, both of you are at risk." At those words, tears burst forth. Elise covered her face and sobbed like a child. Sir Alister said nothing, only tightened his hold on her hand, as though passing her a share of his strength. In the days that followed, he visited often. He brought fruit, milk, and sometimes rare old books for her to pass the hours. Elise soon realized that Alister was no ordinary man. He had once been the chairman of Montgomery & Co., one of Britain's wealthiest financial firms. But his wife had died young, his only son fallen in war. Now he lived alone in a sprawling country estate. Wealth meant little to him, but emptiness never left. Elise listened, sometimes silent, sometimes nodding gently, and she recognized a rare sincerity born of grief and survival in his eyes. One afternoon, Alister asked, "Elise, what do you plan to do after the baby is born?" She hesitated. "I will keep working, perhaps cleaning, sewing, as long as I can feed the child." Alister studied her for a long while, then spoke with deliberate calm. "You should not bear this alone. I have lost my family, but I believe fate is never cruel forever. If you allow, I want to help. Not charity companionship. I want this child to grow strong, wise, able to protect itself, and if need be, the memory of its mother." Elise was stunned. "Sir Montgomery, why? Why help me? I am nothing but a stranger." Alister smiled faintly, kindness flickering in his eyes. "Because I see in you what I once saw in my wife, courage. And because when I caught your body as you fell, I realized, perhaps fate had given me another chance not to live in loneliness. Allow me to be a spiritual father to your child." Elise froze, her heart pounding. Once, she had yearned for Edward to say words of protection, to be her anchor. Instead, he had left only a cold check. And now, after mere days, this stranger offered her a hand warm with loyalty. After a long silence, Elise nodded, tears streaming. "All right. But I do not want my child to live on pity. I want her to be strong, educated, and able to stand independently." Alister clasped her hand firmly. "I promise. I will teach her everything. I will raise her as one raises a warrior. This child will not merely survive, she will conquer." Elise moved into a small house on the Montgomery estate in the following months. She worked part-time at a local library, while Alistair covered living expenses and medical care. On the day Amelie was born, snow still drifted outside the window. Exhausted yet radiant, Elise held her daughter close. The infant, wide-eyed and bright, clutched her mother's finger. Elise whispered, "Amelie, you will be your mother's miracle." Beside the bed, Alistair smiled, a rare sight on his weathered face. He took the child in his arms and said softly, "Welcome, little princess. I am your godfather, and I will make you a light in the darkness." Time passed. Amelie grew up under her mother's sacrifice and Alistair's guidance. While other children played with dolls, Amelie sat in libraries, reading Shakespeare, Racine, and the rudiments of law. While other youths idled in parks, she studied financial reports and memorized contract clauses. In his vast study, lined with maps and leather-bound tomes, Alistair spread papers before her, patiently explaining, "This is how corporations evade taxes. This is how a man of power conceals his mistakes. You must learn to look beyond numbers and see the truth beneath." Amelie listened intently, eyes ablaze. Elise often worried. She is still so young. Should she bear such weight? But Amelie always replied with a determined smile, "Mother, I do not feel burdened. I feel armed. Armed to protect you, to protect the truth." Elise would fall silent, proud, yet aching. She knew her daughter carried a flame of vengeance she had never wished to pass on, but could not extinguish. One summer evening, when Amelie was 10, Alistair handed her an old newspaper. On the front page stood Edward Lancaster, radiant after another business triumph. "This is your father," Alistair said calmly. Amelie stared for a long while, then clenched her fists. "He has forgotten us," she whispered, "but I will make him remember." Alistair placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Yes, but remember this. Vengeance is not only for anger. Vengeance must rebuild justice. If you let hatred consume you, you will become like him. But you will rise above him if you forge it into justice." Amelie nodded. His words etched themselves into her soul. And thus, a warrior of justice was forged in shadow. Elise is the tireless mother, working to exhaustion to raise her child. Alistair the spiritual father, imparting every secret of finance and power. And Amelie the child who carried her mother's love and sorrow, and the wisdom of a master strategist. The snowy night of humiliation had planted the seed of tragedy. But that fall upon the steps of the underground station opened another path. The path toward a great reckoning, the revolution that bore the name Amélie Moreau. Amélie Moreau did not grow up like other children. She had no afternoons playing with dolls in the neighborhood, no laughter echoing across fields, no family picnics. Her childhood was consumed by rooms stacked with books, desks buried beneath papers, and sleepless nights under the yellow glow of the Montgomery Estate Library. Around her rose walls of legal tomes, economic histories, and biographies of men who built empires only to lose them. Maps of the world lay spread across the table, tracing the paths of money, accompanied by the lessons Sir Alistair Montgomery deemed essential to forge a warrior. Amélie learned philosophy before she ever read fairy tales. While other girls her age fumbled with lipstick and hairpins, she pored over the wealth of nations and financial charts. Conversations between foster fathers and daughters were never bedtime stories. Instead, they were debates on tax policy or the tricks corporations use to evade the law. Alistair never told Amélie she was too young. He treated her as an heir to knowledge, a soldier in training destined to carry on his spirit. Every day, he reminded her, "You must see with two eyes, one to perceive what they want you to see, and the other to pierce the veil to where the shadows conceal truth." Amélie listened and memorized every word. Meanwhile, Elise labored silently. Each morning, she rose early for the library. At dusk, she cleaned office buildings. At night, her cracked hands mended clothes for a small tailor shop. Hands once soft, once skilled in painting and turning book pages, had grown rough, hardened, and yet, when she returned home, Elise always smiled at her daughter and sat at the little wooden kitchen table, listening as Amélie recounted Alistair's lessons. Her eyes gleamed with pride, though her shoulders sagged beneath exhaustion. One night, Amelie noticed her mother's hand trembling as she lifted a spoon. Alarmed, she asked, "Mother, why won't you rest? We have Sir Alistair. I can't bear to see you so worn." Elise shook her head, her smile weary yet firm. "My love, I cannot stop working. I don't want you to believe everything can be achieved by relying on others. No matter how much support we receive, you must labor and keep your dignity. The only thing no one can strip from us is our work pride." Those words etched themselves into Amelie's mind. She felt both pain and fury. Pain at her mother's frailty, fury at Edward Lancaster for casting her into such hardship, and she vowed, one day, her mother would suffer no more. At 12, Amelie faced her first field test. Sir Alistair placed her in a small firm tangentially tied to Lancaster Industries, her cover. An intern running errands, sorting papers, making tea, and carrying letters. But Amelie did more. Her eyes devoured everything. How an accountant concealed a payment, how a director hurriedly signed a dubious contract, how employees whispered of decisions handed down from Mr. Lancaster. At home, she wrote a detailed report, listing every irregularity. Alistair read it and nodded, satisfied. "Very good. You saw through the numbers. Behind that polished surface lies rot. And at the center of this web, Edward Lancaster." Hearing the name, Amelie clenched her fists. Hatred burned brighter. By 15, she could dissect financial reports within minutes, pinpointing hidden flaws. She learned to read body language in meetings, to distinguish truth from lies. Alistair brought her to the auctions to finance summits. No one knew who the young girl was, only that her eyes belonged to someone born to stride into the world of power. But Elise grew weaker. She kept working, kept providing, yet Amelie noticed the aspirin multiplying, taken to fend off chest pains. One night, Amelie wept, clutching her hand. "Mother, please stop. I am old enough I can carry this for you." Elise stroked her daughter's hair, her gaze tender yet sorrowful. "No, Amelia, I must work, because I want you to see that women never surrender. Poor, in pain we still fight. Remember this image. One day, it will give you strength." Amelie embraced her, heart torn between pride and grief. At 18, Sir Alistair was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He remained at her side in his final months, imparting every last fragment of knowledge. Before closing his eyes forever, he wrote his will, leaving his entire fortune, nearly £60 billion, to Amelie. In his last moment, he gripped her hand, voice frail yet commanding, "I have given you everything I know. Now you must walk alone. Seek not revenge for rage alone, but for justice. Make Lancaster a lesson to the world, but do not let hatred devour your soul." Amelie sobbed, promising through her tears, "I will make you proud. I will make Mother proud." Months later, Elise collapsed in the break room of an office building. The final heart attack claimed her life at 43. When found, her hand still clutched a photo of Amelie at graduation. The funeral was simple, rain pouring down. Amelie stood alone before the coffin, unweeping. Her heart held no room for tears. Only one vow remained. "He will pay for every tear you shed, Mother. Edward Lancaster will pay it all." After the funeral, Amelie began her campaign. She founded a shell company in Paris, investing discreetly yet strategically in Lancaster Industries-related industries. Step by step, brick by brick, she carved a path into Edward's empire. She sought out those he had wronged, betrayed partners, discarded employees, devoured rivals. With subtlety, she turned their hatred into alliances. Her network grew, stretching from London to Paris. She gathered financial documents and the secrets and weaknesses of every man surrounding Edward. Each move was deliberate, and each pawn was placed with precision. By 20, Amelie possessed a sharp intellect, real-world experience, and a fortune large enough to shake markets. Standing before the mirror in her new office, she looked into her eyes. There she saw Elise, gentle and steadfast, Alistair dignified and wise, and herself a flame of hatred honed into a weapon. "It is time," she whispered. "Edward Lancaster, my father, you will know the meaning of darkness. The days following Sir Alistair's passing turned the small house where Amelie and her mother lived into something vast and hollow. His absence left a void no sound could fill. Amelie hurled herself into study, into work, into secret plans long sketched in the shadows. But Elise was different. She no longer had a companion to converse with each evening, no voice of encouragement from a learned friend. What remained was solitude, and the crushing responsibility to guide her daughter into strength. Elise worked ceaselessly, though her health waned. She cleaned office buildings at night, kept shifts at the library by day, and still took in sewing for a few coins more. Amelie often begged her to stop, reminding her that Alistair's fortune meant they no longer needed such hardship. But Elise always shook her head, eyes tender yet firm. Money can feed the body, my love, but it cannot preserve pride. I work not merely to live, but to show you that women can stand, no matter the circumstance. Every night, Amelie heard her mother's cough echoing from the kitchen as she washed cups, listened to, and her heavy steps across the floorboards. Some nights, Elise collapsed into a chair, clutching her chest in pain, yet when Amelie rushed to her, she forced a smile, insisting it was nothing but fatigue. Amelie knew better, yet she was powerless. Elise would never see a doctor, never lay down her burdens. The fateful morning came in October. Elise had just finished a night shift cleaning a tower. In the break room, she sat upon a plastic chair and lifted a cup of water. Then pain seized her chest sharp, relentless, as if 100 needles pierced her heart. She fell, gasping, clutching the photo of Amelie in her graduation robe, radiant with promise. By the time co-workers found her, Elise Moreau no longer breathed. A massive heart attack had claimed her at 43, an age that should have held youth, but had been consumed by toil, by loneliness, by years of quiet struggle. The news tore through Amelie like a blade. She was returning from a meeting in Paris when the call came. Her ears rang. The world fell silent, save for the hammering of her heart. She rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Her mother lay still, serene as if in sleep, calloused hands clutching the photograph. The funeral was modest. Only a few poor colleagues came to pay their respects. Rain poured down, drumming against the wooden coffin, soaking into the earth. Amelie stood unmoving before the grave, her black hair plastered to her pale face. She shed no tears. Her tears had long been spent. What remained was an emptiness and a fire that roared within it. In silence, she laid her hand upon the headstone and whispered, "I swear, Mother, he will pay. Every drop of sweat you shed, every humiliation you endured, I will force Edward Lancaster to taste tenfold. He will lose everything, and his name will be buried beneath yours." After the funeral, Amelie returned to the empty house. Every corner still breathed Elise. The wooden chair where she sewed, the chipped porcelain cup she used for tea, the half-finished woolen scarf. Amelie strolled through each room, touching each object, as if her mother lingered still. She sat at the dining table, gazing at the empty chair opposite, where Elise once shared small stories of her day. The silence pressed against her chest, but tears did not fall. They had hardened into steel, and that steel was being forged into a weapon. In the weeks that followed, Amelie drowned herself in work. Her grief became fuel. She sifted through Alistair's files, cross-referencing with her own growing troves of financial data. She began acquiring hidden shares in satellite firms, tightening her grip on the lattice of Edward's financial empire. But beneath the cold arithmetic lay something more profound. Each night, Amelie lit a candle before her mother's photograph. She whispered as though Elise could hear, "Today I took another step, Mother. I bought into the company he once boasted as his first triumph. Do you see? Slowly, I am dismantling all he built. I will not stop." Elise's memory lived vividly in her. The smile as she mended her daughter's dress, the light in her eyes as she listened to Amelie recount a lesson, the soft hum of her voice as she washed dishes. These recollections lifted her and tormented her. They reminded her of love without limit, and of a life cut cruelly short by a coward's betrayal. Amelie christened her campaign Project Elise. Every move, every investment, every acquisition was inscribed in her notebook, marked with a simple reminder, for Mother. She was no longer a young girl among her classmates. She had become a woman with a mission. One night, gazing from her window over the city, Amelie whispered, "You live to work, raise me, and preserve your dignity. I will live to claim justice for you. You died silently, but I will make the world speak your name with reverence." She knew she walked a path with no return, yet she did not fear. Within her surged two forces, love and pain. One bequeathed by her mother, the other by her father's betrayal. Together, they blazed into an unquenchable fire. That night, Amelie closed her notebook, set down her pen, and looked into Elise's portrait. Her lips formed a vow. "Mother, I will build an empire from your pain, and I will crush my father beneath it. He will learn what it means to lose everything. And that day, I will call justice." Lancaster Industries, the emblem of London's financial might, had long stood as an impregnable fortress. Edward Lancaster had raised it from a cramped office to a gleaming skyscraper at the city's heart for over 30 years. Every brick, every pane of glass reflecting the sun was a monument to how high ambition and ruthlessness could carry a man. But that December morning, the fortress began to tremble, undone by the daughter whose very existence he had once denied. News of a young shareholder named Amélie Moreau seizing 53% control shook the markets. Financial papers splashed headlines, "Mystery businesswoman from Paris seizes Lancaster Industries." Television networks called in analysts, speculating whether this was mere opportunism or the dawn of a seismic shift. Only Edward Lancaster knew the truth. This was no accident. This was revenge, planned for 2 decades. Edward stared at the screen broadcasting Amélie's press conference in his high-rise office. He was accustomed to holding the microphone, to all eyes upon him. Yet now, he was reduced to a captive audience, watching a script his daughter authored. Amélie stepped before the cameras, her dark hair falling loose, her white suit immaculate, her eyes razor-sharp. Her voice rang out, steady, unflinching, as if rehearsed 1,000 times. "As of today, Lancaster Industries is officially renamed Moreau Enterprises. I, Amélie Moreau, am its controlling shareholder. This empire will no longer serve one man's vanity, but will become an instrument of justice for those he trampled." The press erupted. Cameras flashed wildly. A reporter shouted, "Miss Moreau, can you explain why you chose to take over Lancaster Industries?" Amélie's cold smile cut the air. "I did not choose. Fate chose. 20 years ago, a woman named Elise Moreau was abandoned by Edward Lancaster while pregnant with me. He scorned her for being poor, unfit for his glittering soirees. She died in hardship, working 3 jobs to raise me. And now, I return to claim what belongs to her." The room froze, then chaos, gasps, frantic typing, hushed shouts. This was no business maneuver, it was a family tragedy, a vendetta without precedent. In his office, Edward slammed the desk, barking at his aide. "Turn it off. Shut it all off. This is slander." But he knew no switch could silence public opinion. The fire had already spread. That afternoon, Amélie strode into the Lancaster Tower, flanked by aides in uniforms emblazoned with the new logo. The marble corridors where Edward once reigned like a king now echoed with the steps of his unwanted heir. Employees lined the walls, watching, some curious, some anxious, but many with eyes alight, as though justice had finally breached the gates. Amélie did not shout or pound the table, a nod sufficed. Security opened the doors to the executive suite. Edward stood within, face crimson with rage. "You have no right," he roared. "I built this place from nothing. I am Lancaster Industries." Amélie advanced, stopping just short of his desk. Her eyes were steel. "No, Edward, you are not Lancaster Industries. You are merely a man who wielded cruelty to build it. From this day, this place bears the name of the woman you cast aside. This tower is now the Elise Moreau Tower. When you walk out, lift your eyes to the new sign. Let it remind you, for the rest of your days, of the woman you killed with cowardice." Edward staggered as though struck in the chest. He stammered, "No, Elise. Impossible." Amélie's tone remained icy. "You have 15 minutes to collect your belongings. Security will escort you out. This world is no longer yours." The minutes unfolded like a nightmare. Edward stuffed papers, an old briefcase, and a few photographs into his arms. Colleagues who once bowed before him now turned away. The glass doors opened, and he was led outside. The new sign blazed above, Elise Moreau Tower. Its polished letters gleamed in the winter sun like a verdict carved into London's sky. Reporters swarmed, cameras trained on Edward's faltering steps. "Mr. Lancaster, do you acknowledge Amélie Moreau as your daughter? Do you regret abandoning Elise Moreau? How do you respond to being toppled by your own child?" Edward said nothing. His head hung low, trembling hands clinging to his case as he scrambled into his car. But the lenses had captured everything: the vacant stare, the humiliation of a man dragged from his throne. High above, Amélie stood on the balcony, watching. The wind teased her hair, but her gaze remained fixed, cold, unyielding. She knew this was only the beginning. This was not Edward's end, only the first movement in her symphony of retribution. Inside, she convened the board. They sat in silence, pupils awaiting command. Her voice cut through the air, measured, precise. "From this day, Moreau Enterprises will operate under a new creed. We will sever every corrupt deal Edward Lancaster forged. We will invest in projects that serve communities. Every fraudulent contract and bribe will be dragged into the light." A director hesitated. "But Miss Moreau, such measures will cost us substantial profit." Amélie's gaze locked onto him, silencing him mid-sentence. "Profit cannot be built on blood and tears. If you disagree, leave. I have no use for those who bow only to money." None moved. They understood the storm had come, and its eye was this young woman. As the city glittered beneath that evening, Amélie sat alone in her office. London bustled on, untouched, as though nothing had changed. Yet she knew history had turned. Edward Lancaster was dethroned, and this was merely the opening blow. Within her chest, there was no gloating triumph, only a strange stillness. She thought of her mother, the woman who once stitched clothes with cracked hands, smiling despite the pain. And Amélie whispered, "Mother, today I have done the first thing, but I will not stop. He will taste everything you endured. This is only the beginning." Outside, the sign shone against the night, Elise Moreau Tower. Its light burned like a torch, piercing the darkness around Edward Lancaster, heralding a new age that Amélie would script with blood, tears, and justice. Outside, winter fog smothered the night. But inside the grand ballroom of Claridge's hotel, the world glittered like paradise. Crystal chandeliers rained light upon champagne glasses, violins whispered through laughter, and London's aristocracy preened in gowns worth more than a working family's lifetime. The annual Royal Children's Fund Gala was a theatre where the most powerful names flaunted wealth, false benevolence, and stones sparkling like stolen stars. Men in tuxedos murmured about the stock market. Ladies compared notes on the hunting season in Scotland. But tonight, none of it mattered. Everyone waited for one name: Amélie Moreau, the woman shaking the pillars of London's financial world. The doors opened. Amélie entered, her scarlet gown blazing like fire, diamonds flickering at her throat. She needed no escort, no introduction. For a heartbeat, the entire hall forgot to breathe. Cameras snapped in a frantic rhythm. Those who once sneered at Elise Moreau now bent low before her daughter, their lips curling into false smiles, desperate for her gaze. Behind her came an older woman in a wheelchair, silver hair framing eyes still defiantly sharp. Madeleine Moreau, Elise's mother, Amélie's grandmother, whom she had only met as an adult. Murmurs rippled. Some recognized her, others whispered, "Who is she? She looks familiar." Amélie strode to the stage. The music ceased, and the spotlight crowned her. All eyes were fixed. Edward Lancaster was there too, having clawed into the gala to salvage some dignity. He lingered in the shadows, his posture hollowed by recent defeat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amélie began, her voice clear, resonant, "thank you for being here. Tonight, we will not speak only of charity. Tonight, we speak of truth. A truth buried for 20 years. A ripple of confusion, brows furrowed. The screen behind her lit up. An old photograph appeared. Elise Moreau at Ashcroft Manor 2 decades past. Gentle eyes, intelligent smile, but a plain black dress glaringly out of place amid glittering gowns. Gasps spread. Some remembered instantly that night when London's nobility laughed at the young woman beside Edward Lancaster. "This," Amélie said, "is my mother, Elise Moreau." She loved Edward Lancaster wholeheartedly, only to be discarded because she was not fit for his world. She was humiliated, abandoned while carrying me, and forced into poverty until it killed her. The crowd roared with whispers, faces drained. Lady Margaret Ashcroft, hostess of that very ball, turned ashen. Amélie's voice sharpened. "Some of you in this room remember well, because you were the ones who laughed. You called her a shopgirl's doll, Edward's charity case. And Edward, her husband, chose to withdraw his hand from hers, to save his hollow pride. That night was the beginning of the tragedy that ended my mother's life." A suffocating silence fell. Then Lady Margaret's trembling voice broke it. I remember. I mocked her. I was wrong. But Edward, he laughed with us. He abandoned her." Every eye turned toward Edward. He faltered, sweat soaking his brow. "No, it wasn't like that," he stammered. But Amélie's words thundered through the microphone. That night was only the beginning. On Christmas Eve, Edward Lancaster divorced my mother. He tossed her a check for £20,000, his so-called gift, to buy something decent. She never cashed it. She kept it until her death, as a relic of the humiliation he dealt her. On the screen, the image of the check appeared. Edward's scrawled handwriting still legible. The audience erupted gasps, shaking heads, cries of disgust. Amélie's eyes bored into Edward. "This is the truth you buried for 20 years. But tonight, London will know. The world will know. You are not merely a ruthless businessman. You are a coward who abandoned his wife while she bore his child." From the front row came sobs. Madeleine Moreau was wheeled onto the stage. Her voice shook, but it carried iron. "Elise was my daughter. I lost her because of you, Edward Lancaster. She was too proud to return home, too ashamed to ask for help. She died alone, while you lived in luxury. But tonight, justice has arrived." The hall erupted. Some wept openly, others glared with fury. Edward's allies stepped back, as if fearing his disgrace might stain them. Edward stumbled forward. "Amélie, listen to your father." But she shook her head. "You lost the right to call me daughter 20 years ago." She turned to the crowd, voice ringing like a bell. "In memory of my mother, I established the Elise Moreau Foundation with an initial endowment of £100 million. This fund will support abandoned single mothers, so no one needs to endure what she did. Its headquarters will stand in the very building once named for Edward Lancaster. Now, it bears her name." Thunderous applause. The hall rose to its feet, cheers surging. Edward stood frozen, bloodless. He knew his reputation had died. No gala, board, or circle of power would welcome him again. He was unmasked, disgraced, damned in the very temple he once ruled. As Amélie descended, she passed close to him. Only a few steps apart, yet the gulf of 20 years yawned infinite. She leaned, whispering so only he heard. "This is just the beginning. The world now knows who you are. But I am not finished. I will take the rest." Edward trembled, tears brimming, but no words came. That night, headlines blazed. Amélie Moreau exposes Edward Lancaster before society. Papers once hailing him as a genius now branded him, from founder to betrayer. In his cheap hotel room, Edward stared into a mirror. The face looking back had aged 10 years overnight. He saw Elise again, her eyes on that Christmas Eve, asking, "Edward, are you ashamed of me?" He remembered his reply, cold, merciless. And now that answer had returned, shattering his career, honor, and very name. Meanwhile, Amélie stood at her window, gazing over London's blazing lights. She felt no triumph, only a cold stillness. Yet within, she knew her mother must be smiling somewhere, and she whispered, "Mother, I have shown them the truth, but I am not done. He will fall further, much further." That night, a new chapter in her revenge began. Edward Lancaster had lost his honor. Soon, he would lose everything else. London's January cold cut like knives. Edward Lancaster hunched inside a worn coat, standing motionless before the wooden gates of the mansion that had once been his pride. The polished brass plate reading Lancaster Manor was gone, replaced by a new sign: Elise Moreau House, Centre for Women and Children. Porch lights glowed warmly, but to Edward, their light mocked him. He had lived here once, hosting dignitaries, raising toasts as jazz spilled over the garden. Now the iron gates were sealed, guarded by men in Moreau uniforms, their eyes hard as stone. Edward turned, walking into the night. He had no home, no wealth, no name. Banks had frozen his accounts, creditors called in debts, and partners severed ties. Collapse had come so swiftly, he barely believed it. He dialed old friends. Everett Pembroke hung up after 3 rings. Victor de Clermont replied, "I'm sorry, Edward. I cannot be involved." Even past lovers vanished without a trace. The manager barred his entry at Hamilton Club, where he was once honored. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lancaster. Your membership has been revoked." He pounded the counter and shouted, but only earned strangers' pitying, contemptuous stares. For a time, he hid in hotel rooms, but bills went unpaid. Soon, he was cast out with a single battered suitcase. That night, he wandered Oxford Street, neon lights glaring across his gaunt face. On a giant screen above, an ad for the Elise Moreau Foundation played. Elise's young smile, gentle eyes, Amelie's voice narrating, "She taught me resilience above all else. Her name will endure." Edward froze. The city itself seemed to shine upon him, only to expose his shadow. One morning, he saw a tabloid at a station kiosk. Front page, his photo, haggard and broken. Headline, "From Billionaire to Homeless, the Fall of Edward Lancaster." Passers-by laughed, reading aloud. A group of youths recognized him, snapping photos. One jeered, "That's the bastard who abandoned his wife while she was pregnant. Coward." Their laughter chased him down the street. He tried clawing back. He walked into Lancaster Industries, no, Moreau Enterprises. At the reception, the clerk's eyes were cold. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lancaster. You are not permitted entry. Orders of the new CEO." He protested. Security arrived polite, firm, and escorted him outside. The glass doors closed. His reflection stared back, disheveled hair, hollow eyes, a stained coat. He no longer recognized himself. Eventually, he accepted work he would once have spat upon. Janitor, at Moreau Enterprises, in the very tower that once bore his name. On his first day, the manager handed him a cheap polyester uniform, maintenance stamped across the chest. The fabric itched against his skin. "You'll start on the executive floors. Restrooms, then offices. 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. No benefits for 90 days. Minimum wage." Edward wanted to scream this was an insult beyond measure, but he said nothing. He took the mop. The elevator lifted him to the 40th floor, his former sanctum. Plush carpets, soft light, and paintings on the walls. Once, he had marched here like a king, but he kept his eyes down, bucket in hand. The executive restroom gleamed. Marble sinks, gold-plated taps, his own choices years ago. Now he knelt, scrubbing stains from the toilet. Bleach stung his eyes. Each smear was a slap of memory. He scrubbed like a ghost once he adjusted his tie here before signing million-pound deals. He dusted offices, crawled under desks. His back ached, his knees burned, but no one cared. Young staff passed without a glance. To them, he was just a grey-clad cleaner. That night, in his cheap East End room, Edward lay spent. Elise's image came, kneeling on a floor, scrubbing as he did now, hands trembling yet eyes still bright. He had never asked why her soft hands grew calloused. Now he understood. He was reliving her life, hour by hour. Face buried in the pillow, he whispered, "Elise, I was wrong." No one heard. Elise was long in her grave, and Amélie sat on the throne he had lost. Days blurred. He scrubbed, carried trash, and overheard whispers of Elise. In the hallways, he saw framed photographs Amélie had hung. Elise cradling young Amélie, Elise in a library, Elise smiling among old books. Each image carved into him like a blade. One noon, as he polished glass, 3 older cleaners approached, One asked quietly, "Are you truly Edward Lancaster?" Shame burning. He nodded. "I knew Elise," the man said. "She cleaned these halls once, too. Pregnant, yet never stopped." Edward froze. Another woman added softly, "She was kind. Shared her lunch even when she had nothing. Many times, I saw her weep quietly, speaking of her husband. She never cursed you, Edward. She was only sad. That sadness stayed with her till the end." Edward dropped the rag, trembling. He sank, gasping. Sweat chilled his brow. He wanted to scream, to drown the memories, but their voices only pressed harder. Yet the cruelest moment was still to come. One Saturday morning, scrubbing the executive restroom, he heard a voice behind him. "Edward." He turned and saw his mother, Beatrice Lancaster, elegant still, pearls at her neck. But her eyes held no mercy, only loathing. "My God," she whispered, "it's true. You abandoned Elise. You let her daughter destroy everything. And now you scrub toilets in the building you once owned." "Mother." His soapy hands trembled. "Please listen. I was young, pressured, and afraid of ridicule." Silence. Her voice cut like ice. "I believed you when you said Elise was unworthy. I thought she wanted your wealth. But she never took a penny, never betrayed you. She worked herself to death, while you sat on a throne built from her bones." Edward collapsed, tears streaking with suds. I only wanted to be accepted. I was afraid they would laugh. And so you killed a woman to shield your hollow pride." Beatrice unclasped the pearls from her neck and set them on the counter. "This was Lancaster's legacy, no longer. From today on, it belongs to Angel Moreau, my granddaughter. You are no longer my son. Live out your days in shame, as you forced Elise to." She turned, her silhouette vanishing through the glass doors. Edward fell to the tiles, sobbing like a child. He had lost his career, friends, and honor. And now, his own mother. From then on, he lived like a shadow. By day, he scrubbed floors. By night, he sat silently, haunted by Elise's voice. "Edward, are you ashamed of me?" In dreams, she asked again. He tried to answer differently, to say no, never, but his throat closed, and before he could speak, she vanished, leaving only the cry of a child. He woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering, alone. One morning, passing through the lobby, Edward stopped before a new bronze statue, Elise Moreau, serene, eyes gentle. The inscription, "Elise Moreau, a woman of resilience, an eternal inspiration." Edward knelt. His hand trembled upon the letters. Tears came unrestrained at last. He whispered, "Elise, I am sorry. I killed you with cowardice. And now, I am dying daily in the shame you bore." No one heard, save the statue. But to Edward, it was final proof. Justice had arrived. Elise is immortal, and he is condemned to live in her shadow, consumed by the darkness of his own making. The message came on a rainy night. Edward Lancaster sat hunched in his damp, peeling rented room, back pressed against stained plaster. He had all but abandoned hope, drifting through days like a shadow. Then his phone buzzed. A strange number. The text read simply, "Mr. Lancaster, we represent Moreau Enterprises. Miss Amélie Moreau wishes to meet you." His heart pounded. Fear and hope tangled, dizzying him. For months, he had seen Amélie only in headlines and photographs, seated in the chair that once was his. He had never spoken to her, never explained, never begged forgiveness. And now she was asking. The meeting was set for the top floor of the Elise Moreau Tower. The next morning, Edward dressed in his oldest surviving suit, the one he once wore proudly, now frayed at the cuffs. He smoothed back his silver hair, fingers trembling as he wrestled with a tie that refused to obey. When he stepped into the tower, security no longer turned him away. They scanned his invitation, then bowed slightly. "Welcome, Mr. Lancaster." For the first time in months, he heard those words, Mr. Lancaster. They rang like a ghost from another life, swelling his chest with fragile hope. The elevator bore him upward. On the 50th floor, morning light flooded through glass walls. At the head of the table sat Amélie, poised, commanding, though faint weariness lingered in her eyes. Her navy suit was sharp, Her hair swept into a bun, her gaze cutting straight through him. "Father," she said. "Not Edward, but father." Edward froze, throat clenched tight. Tears welled instantly. "What? What did you call me?" "Father," Amélie repeated, voice calm. "Because, despite everything, the truth remains. You gave me life. I have thought long and hard. Perhaps, if my mother were still alive, she would want me to grant you one chance to atone." Edward collapsed into the chair, covering his face. He sobbed like a child. "Thank you, Amélie, thank you. I was wrong. I was weak, and I was a coward. Please, let me do something to make it right. I cannot live another day in this darkness." Amélie was silent momentarily, then slid a folder across the table. "This is a contract. You will hold a press conference. Before the world, you will acknowledge me as your legitimate daughter, apologize publicly for abandoning my mother, and pledge all assets remaining in your name, including the Cayman accounts, to the Elise Moreau Foundation. Do this, and I will stop. You may live your final years in peace. Not in luxury, but in peace." Edward's hands shook as he leafed through the pages. Every clause was airtight. You truly will stop?" Amélie's eyes betrayed nothing. She nodded. "I will stop." In his chest, a fire flickered back to life. He imagined himself before reporters, confessing, apologizing, and then retreating to a small house, free from memory and mockery. Perhaps even one day, Amélie might allow him to visit Elise's grave and lay a flower without being driven away. The day arrived swiftly. The hall was packed with journalists. Edward wore his only suit, stepping to the podium on unsteady legs. Floodlights blinded him. Cameras clicked like gunfire. His voice rasped through the speakers. "I am Edward Lancaster. I acknowledge Amélie Moreau as my daughter. I admit that I abandoned Elise Moreau while she was pregnant, and I apologize publicly for that cowardice. I will transfer all remaining assets to the Elise Moreau Foundation, hoping to redeem a fragment of my guilt." Silence. Then an eruption of flashes, shouts, and frantic typing. Edward stood drenched in sweat but lighter than he had felt in decades. He believed he had laid down the weight for the first time in 20 years. As the conference closed, he looked back. Amélie sat in the front row. She inclined her head, lips forming the faintest smile. In that instant, Edward believed he had been forgiven. That night, in his narrow bed, he slept peacefully for the first time in years. He dreamt of Elise, not in anger, but in light. He did not know it was a trap. The nightmare was yet to come. The next morning, London's headlines blazed. Edward Lancaster's historic confession. Some called it a long, overdue, but necessary act. Others mocked. The betrayer, finally Bose. Regardless of tone, all agreed Edward had buried his name. He read the articles with blurred eyes. He did not mind the ridicule, nor the barbs. Only one truth mattered. Amélie had promised to stop. A tender seed of hope sprouted. He could live out his remaining years in obscurity, but in peace. That afternoon, a black car pulled up at his lodgings. A driver in a black suit delivered an envelope. Inside was an embossed card. "Mr. Edward Lancaster is cordially invited to the inaugural gala of the Elise Moreau Foundation, Elise Moreau Tower. Miss Amélie Moreau especially requests your presence." Edward sat frozen, hands trembling. Was this cruel trickery or reconciliation? Hope surged stronger. Perhaps, at last, she meant to heal. Maybe tonight he would stand beside his daughter, for the first time, as family. He prepared with care, pressed his threadbare suit and polished his old shoes. In the mirror, an old, hollow man looked back, eyes glimmering faintly with belief. That evening, he entered the Elise Moreau Tower. No one blocked him. Staff smiled and welcomed him. Red carpet led him into a hall blazing with chandeliers, thrumming with music, crowded with London's elite. At the center, Amélie appeared in a white gown, radiant, a young queen. Beside her sat Madeleine Moreau, the grandmother Edward had long avoided. Silence swept the hall as Amélie took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, "tonight we celebrate the birth of the Elise Moreau Foundation. Yesterday, You witnessed Edward Lancaster confess and apologize. That was the first step, but not enough. I will show you the full truth tonight, unedited, unhidden. The giant screen lit. Edward's younger face appeared, grinning, with a champagne glass at a long-ago party. Elise lingered in the background, lost in a plain dress. Then came the audio, his own voice, sneering. She looks like a charity case, but I'll deal with it. I cannot let some poor woman ruin my career. Edward's stomach dropped. He remembered the night, the words buried, forgotten. Yet Amélie had found the recording. The footage rolled on. The £20,000 check filled the screen, scrawled with his note, "Buy something decent for once." The hall gasped, murmurs cutting like knives. Then came photos of Elise working herself to exhaustion, scrubbing floors, carrying trays, and slumping at train stations. Amélie's voice overlaid, "While he lived in luxury, this is how my mother raised me. This is the price Elise Moreau paid for blind love." Edward covered his face, trembling. He wanted to flee, but his legs were leaden. Amélie's voice hardened. "Yesterday, Edward Lancaster apologized. Some asked if I would forgive. Here is my answer." She turned to him, eyes blazing. "No, I do not forgive. I let him dig his own grave." His confession was broadcast, recorded, and immortalized. No denial, no escape. He signed his own sentence. The hall erupted applause, jeers, pity, scorn. Edward staggered, sweat pouring. "Amélie, you promised. You said you would stop." She descended, heels striking the marble, silence swallowing the room. She stood before him, leaned close, and whispered, her words caught by every microphone. "Father, you taught me promises are tools. You taught me honor can be sold, love discarded. Tonight, I return your lesson. This is justice." Edward collapsed to his knees, eyes bloodshot. The hall watched him bow before his daughter, an image bound for every front page by morning. Amélie faced the crowd. The Elise Moreau Foundation will continue, fueled by his surrendered wealth. The last remnants of a sinful life will now rescue abandoned women. That is the only worthy end. Thunderous applause shook the chandeliers. Edward clutched his chest as though his heart were being crushed. Worse than the pain was the truth. The fragile hope he had nursed had been shattered before the world. As guests departed, Amélie stood at a window, London's light blazing. Her eyes reflected them coldly. She did not smile, did not revel. Only stillness remained. She knew she had achieved the crucial step. Edward Lancaster had destroyed himself. Outside, rain lashed Edward's frayed suit as he stumbled into the night. Cameras flashed, voices jeered. Hope was dead. Only the abyss remained. The following spring, London blazed with an event unlike any before. The inauguration of the Elise Moreau Memory Museum, built on the very foundations of the tower that had once embodied Lancaster Industries. The new building no longer glittered with cold panes of glass reflecting power, but opened in light and warmth interwoven gardens where children could play, where women could rest and find comfort. The world's media converged. CNN, BBC, Le Monde, broadcasters from Asia and Africa reported. Commentators hailed Amélie Moreau as one of the century's most influential women, not merely for her wealth, but for transforming private tragedy into a catalyst for social change. Meanwhile, Edward Lancaster drifted like a ghost in his decaying rented room on the city's edge. In the papers, Elise's name appeared repeatedly, honored with reverence. His name lingered only as the betraying husband. He tried not to read, yet his eyes clung to every word, each sentence a blade. On Inauguration Day, he went. No one invited him, but he could not bear to miss the moment Elise's name, the woman he had cast aside, would be carved into history. In a frayed coat, he stood unnoticed at the crowd's edge. To them, he was only an older man, gaunt and lost. On the dais, Amélie took the stage. Beside her sat Madeleine Moreau, radiant with late-found pride. Amélie spoke. "Today, we do not simply open a building. We raise a symbol of resilience, of silent sacrifice. This is the place that tells the story of my mother, Elise Moreau, who lost her youth to labor and poverty, but never her dignity." The giant screen flickered. Elise, young, eyes shining. Elise cradling baby Amelie. Elise shelving books in the library, hands cracked and raw. Tears welled up in the crowd. Amelie went on, "My mother was mocked, abandoned, and deemed worthless. Yet from her suffering, I learned the greatest lesson. Dignity comes not from wealth, but from courage. From today, this museum will be open to all. It will preserve her memory and remind society never again to allow such a tragedy." The crowd erupted, voices chanting, "Elise, Elise," as though calling a hero's name. From the shadows, Edward trembled. He wanted to cry out, "I loved her too. I had moments of happiness with her," but his throat seized. He knew any words now were meaningless. He had not stood beside Elise when she needed him most, and history recorded only that. After the ceremony, the museum opened its doors. The throng filed inside, and Edward slipped in, unseen. The first gallery showed their wedding photo at the town hall, the only surviving image of their brief marriage. The caption read, "A love that promised eternity, undone by pride and prejudice." Edward's hand shook against the glass. "I'm sorry, Elise," he whispered. The next rooms displayed relics: a dress Elise had sewn, a worn book she had read, a battered lunchbox from night shifts. Memories surged her, bent over stitches in lamplight, her tea in a cracked cup, her hopeful eyes waiting for words of love he never gave. In the final gallery, Elise lay frail in her hospital bed, clutching Amelie's graduation photo. Beneath it read, "Elise Moreau died at 43, after decades of relentless toil, yet her love birthed an immortal legacy." Edward collapsed, head bowed, weeping uncontrollably. Visitors passed, casting puzzled glances. None knew, or cared, that the sobbing man was Edward Lancaster, the cause of it all. To them, he was nothing. That night, staggering from the museum, Edward understood. Amelie had won not by wealth or force, but by making the entire world stand with Elise. He, who once had everything, had been erased. Back in his room he lay hollow. Still the chant echoed, "Elise, Elise." He pressed his face into the pillow. "I'm sorry, but too late." Time passed. Amelie's name surged across the globe, not only for her fortune, but also for her story. The abandoned daughter, raised in poverty, who became justice incarnate. Magazines hailed her as the torch of the 21st century. Economists called her the woman who rewrote capitalism with heart. The museum became a pilgrimage site. Schoolchildren came to hear Elise's story. Single mothers came seeking solace. Even business people came to learn the limits of power. In the central hall, gold letters proclaimed, "She died in poverty, but her name lives in glory." Edward vanished from public view. No paper mentioned him, save as a footnote to Elise. He scraped by on small stipends, renting a squalid flat. His days of leather chairs and million-pound contracts shrank to bitter memory. Each morning, he sat in a park, watching children play. Sometimes, in a stranger's laugh, he glimpsed Elise. In a girl's cry, he heard Amelie. But when he turned, there was only emptiness. He murmured apologies into the air. No one listened. At night, dreams repeated. Elise asking if he was ashamed. Amelie's icy stare, applause as he knelt. He woke soaked in sweat, heart pounding. Every dawn reminded him. He had lost, utterly and irredeemably. One day, the radio announced, "Today, the United Nations officially recognizes March 15 as Elise Moreau Day, honoring abandoned women who endure. Her story will enter school curricula worldwide." Edward froze. March 15, his own birthday. Now, forever, that date bore only her name. The world had chosen Elise and erased him. He returned once more to the museum. No one noticed. He knelt before Elise's bronze statue, hand trembling on the cold stone, whispering, "Elise, they call your name, they honor you. And I have nothing. But if somewhere you can still hear, know that I regret. To my bones, I regret." No answer came, only spring wind carrying lilac scent, her favorite. His health declined. Thin, Coughing, delirious, he muttered Elise's name in his sleep. Fellow tenants knew him only as the older man who spoke of a woman in dreams. One night, he collapsed, clutching the yellowed wedding photo, his last relic. Eyes wide, he thought he saw her. Young, smiling, hand outstretched. He whispered, "Forgive me," and his breath stopped. The hospital recorded curtly, male, approx. 70. Name, Edward Lancaster. Homeless, no relatives. His ashes went into an unmarked urn among thousands. No funeral, no farewell. That same day, Amelie addressed a global conference in New York. She announced the foundation's expansion to 20 nations, aiding millions of women and children. Thunderous applause shook the hall as Elise's smiling image filled the screen. Amelie's voice rang. "My mother died in poverty, but her name is now immortal. Elise Moreau belongs to the world." The audience rose, chanting, "Elise, Elise, Elise." The cry soared beyond borders. Two fates diverged. A woman immortalized, a man erased. Elise became a legend. Edward Lancaster vanished, remembered only as a footnote of betrayal. That was the outcome: total victory. Not merely Amelie's, but Elise's, the triumph of justice, of memory restored, and the absolute defeat of Edward, the man who buried himself in cowardice. Spring rain veiled London's glass towers. At the city's heart, the Elise Moreau Tower blazed like a beacon, not only with electric light, but with meaning, justice, dignity, remembrance. Crowds flocked to the museum, bearing flowers and prayers. Elise, once forgotten, was now a symbol the world revered. In the mornings, Amelie often came before the crowds. She sat on the steps, gazing at her mother's eternal face. Here she was not the billionaire, not the power broker, only a daughter, whispering her weariness, her dreams, her wounds. One dawn, as the sky blushed pink, she murmured, "Mother, I did it. I reclaimed everything for you. But sometimes I wonder, did I lose something of myself? I've lived so long in hatred. I don't know if love still survives inside me." The wind stirred, carrying lilac's fragrance. Amelie closed her eyes, hearing her mother's voice. "You have done enough. Now live not only for my pain, but for your own joy." She opened her eyes, a tear sliding down, but with a smile. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future not of vengeance, but of healing. The world continued to chant Elise's name. Alongside it, they called Amelie's. She became a global icon, not for wealth, but for rewriting a story. She proved that justice can come, even late, and dignity can be restored, even for the forgotten. Edward's name faded. No grave, no stone, no mourners, only silence. That was the last punishment, to live for remembrance, but die into oblivion. A year later, at the museum's anniversary, Amelie addressed thousands. She did not speak of Edward, nor his sins. She said only of Elise, "My mother taught me love can exist even in poverty, and dignity cannot be stolen. Her story is mine, and belongs to all dismissed and abandoned. Remember this: no one is worthless as long as they rise again." Applause thundered. At that moment, Amelie understood that true victory was not destroying Edward, but turning Elise's story into a light for others. That night, Amelie looked over the city's glow in her high-tower apartment. The old wounds remained, but the flames of vengeance had cooled. In their place burned another fire: hope, duty, love. She whispered, "Mother, I will live, truly live. Not only for you, but for me." And the answer came in the wind, soft as an embrace. "I am always here, Amélie."